Well, as it turns out, the patch is coming. And what we thought was a relatively small hotfix ended up not actually being a very small hotfix at all. There's an awful lot of changes here. A lot of this stuff is going to end up, I believe, shifting the meta a little bit, but we'll get into it. The most notable of which is we're going to be given lizard men. And I don't know if this is the actual model, but according to what Jay was looking at on his stream, yeah. Yeah. So as of right now, it's approximately 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The servers were actually just, as of about a minute ago, brought down for 3 hours, and then the patch will be back up. So it's supposed to be up around 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's an awful lot of bulleted notes here, and I'm going to try and move through these as quickly as we can. But the primary takeaway from this is that a new Lizardmen race has been added for 4 bluestone or 4 redstone shards. He says that Lizardmen cannot wear any head armor and instead receive an innate plus 15 armor rating from their leathery scales due to their unusual head orientation. Their head hitbox is an angle forward. It slants downward to match, I guess, their model. They said that this is their first foray attempt to balance a race with a different hitbox. The values of the race stats may be updated for balance's sake. Our hope is if this goes according to plan, then we can start experimenting with more daring fantasy races like dwarves, which has been a request that other people had been making for quite some time. Now, this goes into a lot of other things. There's a large takeaway here, the primary one being some loot adjustments, mainly buffs to drop rates that have to do with rares and whatnot, coming from like lesser bosses, like the mini bosses on each map, as well as a buff to royal coffins and the removal of clarity potions, which is kind of huge. In exchange for that, what they've done is they've buffed significantly the amount of restoration to spells that you get from resting by just hitting G and sitting down. They've like doubled the rate at which you recover spell charges just from sitting down on your butt. So this could actually be a very, very interesting trade-off where instead of having as much downtime, you don't necessarily have that as much, but you're not relying on clarity potions and instead still end up having to do the resting, which I think is the more important part, but it's not going to end up costing you a whole bunch of campfires in the case of what it used to be like. But anyway, let's get into the bulleted list for those of you that don't necessarily just want the TLDR. So the drop rate for uncommon and rare items in normal dungeons has been improved. The amount of treasures that can drop from chests has been improved. They improved the drops from royal coffins, slightly improved the drops from stone tombs. Clarity potions no longer drop. Weapon damage scaling has been improved as rarity goes up. Crossbows, throwable weapons, and magical weapons are exempt from this change. So magical weapons being things like crystal swords. But this also means that longbows appear to get a little bit of an innate buff from this. Weapon damage has been increased for daggers, swords, bows, and pole arms. So the longbow might actually end up coming back into its own again. I don't know why the longbow was increased in damage. I don't feel like it really needed it, but hey, whatever. Warmaul damage and armor penetration has been reduced. So this, again, takes a strong hit against buff ball comps that are Barbarian-centric, which is an interesting addition. Battle Axe, Viking Sword, and Chris Dagger attack animations have been updated. I don't know if this means that the angle of attacks have been changed or if there's been a slightly increase or decrease in speed, but we'll have to see what that looks like once we get in there. Buckler impact resistance upgraded from 4 to 6. This means that the buckler can now block a Warmaul crushing blow if you want to risk it. Loot now gives knowledge. Flute now gives agility as a primary stat. Lyre now gives resourcefulness as a primary stat, starting from poor quality. Poor quality meaning the light gray, not the junk quality, but the light gray quality. Northern full tunic armor rating has been reduced. Again, buff ball comp hit. Padded tunic, buff ball comp hit. Armor rating reduced and movement speed penalty slightly increased. Regal Gambison, again, buff ball hit. Armor rating slightly reduced and move speed penalty slightly increased. Yermanbu, Barbuda Helm, and Viking Helm armor rating reduced. All of these bullets are taking shots at buff ball comp and how the Barbarian is capable of getting higher than what they really would want in terms of damage mitigation from physical damage resist. Armit gives strength instead of resourcefulness now as a base stat. Wanderer's outfit, agility instead of knowledge. Doublet gives agility instead of knowledge and move speed penalty slightly increased. Now, this is a massive change if you play a Warlock. Occultist Hood gives magical healing instead of magical resist. That is a huge, huge W. 1 point of magical healing, even just as a static stat on something that's easily obtained from even just vendors in the game, is huge. Wizard Hat gives magical power instead of magic resist. Wizard Shoes give magical power instead of magic resist. Those are also massive changes. And then Dread Hood now gives 15% buff duration bonus. So that one not necessarily as important, but still very, very, very good. Very nice change if you play a Warlock when they're so gear dependent. Okay, on to random modifiers. So what they did is on the random modifier side, minimum action speed, minimum armor rating, move speed, spell casting speed, buff duration, regular interaction speed, magical interaction speed. All of those have had their buffs like increased by a significant amount. Like the minimum action speed that instead of 0.1% is now 0.5. So it makes it a little bit less crappy to get those rolls. They're still not great. No one really wants any of this except spellcasting speed might end up coming into play a little bit to make them like slightly less worthless. But for the most part, these aren't that big of a deal. Fixed an issue where the debuff duration bonus option was being applied in reverse. So the way that it had been working up until this point, which is something that I brought to the devs' attention, is that debuff duration, you wanted it to be a negative number. If debuff duration was improved, meaning that it was on a piece of gear, like you had plus 5% debuff duration bonus, that actually made it worse. It made debuffs last longer, not making them last shorter. So this, luckily, has been fixed. Okay, on to class attributes, perks, and skills. So this has been modified a lot. Spell count recharge when resting significantly improved. Recharge interval reduced from 3 seconds to 2 seconds, meaning each tick, instead of being 3 seconds apart, is now 2 seconds apart, and this is modified by your knowledge, your haste. And the amount of spell cost gained upgraded from 8 to 17. So now we have something that is 33% faster in tick rate and twice as much spell recharge as what we had previous to now. That is huge, huge. Fighter's adrenaline spike perk activation point changed from when remaining health reaches below 15 to below 40%. This makes adrenaline spike potentially worth it. Fighter's adrenaline spike duration changed from 8 to 12 seconds. Adrenaline rush debuff duration has been changed from 4 seconds to 2 seconds, basically making adrenaline spike potentially worth using because now you don't end up having the debuff duration that you had before. Fighter's Taunt now grants 10% magic damage reduction bonus in addition to PDR. So again, potentially helpful, but I don't think that this is enough to want to bring Taunt. Barbarian's Carnage now grants 75 armor rating for 7 seconds instead of 10 strength after a target is killed. Axe specialization now increases weapon damage by 3 flat instead of 10% physical damage bonus. This is a massive change. It actually makes axe specialization better, way better. Barbarian's Achilles Strike debuff duration to the target increased from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. Achilles Strike was pretty much neutered. The addition of this, changing this to 4 seconds, means that if they hit you with Achilles Strike, they actually have a chance to catch up with somebody and give them a follow-up hit, as opposed to it just being annoying for a couple of seconds. Barbarian's Blood Exchange duration increased from 6 to 8 seconds, and lifesteal amount increased from 5% to 15%. This is actually a massive change and might end up bringing Blood Exchange into use. Life Siphon has been renamed to War Sacrifice, now costs 10% of max health as a life sacrifice over 8 seconds, and increases all attributes by 4 to 5. So War Sacrifice or Life Siphon was never really worth it. It used to do way too much damage to the Barb for the Barb to bother wanting to bring it to begin with. This makes it actually worthwhile to take. Rogue's Hand Crossbow Mastery perk also increases crossbow weapon damage by 2. So maybe Crossbow Mastery is worth taking now if hand crossbows are doing a flat extra 2 damage. Double Jump perk. Now this is a massive, massive change to Rogues as well. Double Jump, prior to just now, meant that when you landed, you took a 20% movement speed penalty for a couple of seconds and then you got to regain your move speed. Not anymore. Double Jump now longer gives you the landing penalty, but gives you a flat 20% or minus 20 move speed penalty when the perk is equipped. So now you move 20 move speed slower at all times, but that's your move speed. So this actually might be beneficial, believe it or not, for rogues because you could build some move speed around this and not have to worry about like the faster and slower movement. maybe it's worth taking. I think double jump still stays as a staple in this build, though. Every build. Rogue's weak point attack skill debuff duration has been reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds, and armor rating has been increased from 30 to 40%, minus 40%. So they made weak points initial like hit or two more valuable, but they decreased the duration of it. So hit hard, hit fast, hit early, and then that's it. Rogue's Cutthroat cooldown change from 28 seconds to 14 seconds is also something worth doing. Cutthroat is the silence ability that they have on their dagger strike if you decide to bring it. It just had a really long cooldown and didn't make sense. Ranger's ranged weapon mastery perk physical damage bonus increase from 5% to 10%. That might actually be something that makes Rangers just bring that now. 10% is a lot. Ranger's crippling shot perk now is the additional movement speed penalty applied to the target increased from to 25% instead of 15% when shooting a target's legs. I don't know why they bothered to do this. The slow from any of the bow usages always felt like it was very strong already. The movement speed penalty being a 25% decrease in run speed up from 15% feels like an unnecessary buff to Rangers. I don't think that they needed this. Hopefully they kind of tweak that a little bit because I feel like Rangers were already strong enough, but that's just me. Cleric secondary default. Oh yeah, Cleric changes are ridiculous now, by the way. Cleric got nerfed pretty hard. Cleric secondary default weapon changed from Wizard Staff to Spellbook. That is a huge W. Having a basic Spellbook, although this Spellbook is going to be a really crappy one because instead of even getting like a 2 damage, you're now having a 1 damage like junk quality Spellbook. It's not going to be good for offensive abilities, but you'll have that there to be able to get the better cast rate out of it. Cleric's lesser healing spell count changed from 4 to 3. Casting time slightly increased from 1 to 1.25 seconds. Holy Strike now has a 0.5 second delay before it deals damage. Think of this kind of like a lightning strike cast from a wizard. Same kind of thing. Cleric's Holy Light spell count is down from 4 to 3, so the big heal is now a 3 charge instead of 4 charges. Casting time increased from 2 to 2.5 seconds, and heal base decreased from 30 to 25. Holy Light got nerfed pretty hard. But again, the spell counts aren't necessarily like the big nerf. It's the cast time and the heal base in the case of Holy Light. That's going to be a little bit tough. It also reduces the reliance that people are going to be able to have on clerics, especially without clarity potions in the middle of the fray, and also will affect like buff ball comp because the strong suit of buff ball is that you had a cleric being able to bomb heals on a barbarian or on a fighter or on another cleric while that whole thing was going on. In this case, they're going to have to be a little bit more selective with their healing and get the charges back in downtime, which it looks like the charges coming back in downtime is pretty good. Cleric's Earthquake spell count decreased from 2 to 1, so you only get 1 Earthquake. Locust Swarm from 2 to 1, which, no one really used Locust Swarm anyway, so it's not a big deal. Wizard Haste no longer grants movement speed bonus, but instead increases spellcasting speed bonus by 12%. This is actually a massive, massive change. The movement speed bonus was always nice, but the cast speed bonus going up 12% is huge. That is actually very huge. Wizard's Invisibility now leaves an after image every 1.5 seconds. Massive nerf to Invis. Instead of being able to do some good juke moves if you were a wizard, they're going to be able to track you now. There's probably no real juking being done anymore because people will just look for the after image and try to aim at you. The other piece of this is there's probably not going to be much of a visual indicator for wizards that are using invisibility on themselves so that they know like when the after image is being left behind them, because there is the possibility of being able to like move in one direction, leave the after image, and then kind of cut back to try and like mix up some people. But if you don't really know when that comes out, you know what I mean? Bard's base attributes updated. Strength is now 13 down from 14, up 1 point for will from 7 to 8. Bard's Encore skill now plays the next song at the maximum song playing speed. So one of the biggest, I guess, complaints about Encore was that you just played it at base run speed and you were always better off just taking the perk that let you screw up a note and then advancing the spell and finishing it up as quickly as possible and still getting the great version of that spell. This might make Encore a little bit more worthwhile, but I don't know if that's still going to make it. Maybe if they did it at the maximum possible playing speed available to a bard, if they had the best possible stats, would make sense. But we'll have to test it if, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Shriek of Weakness, its AoE got nerfed to a flat 300 instead of 300, 450, 600. Song of Silence changed from 300, 450, 600 to flat 300 again, and now only silences all enemies instead of everyone. So they nerfed the range, but they made it more beneficial for teams. This actually could bring Song of Silence really into use, because if they have the ability to silence just enemies, even with the smaller range, that could be massive. Bard's Chorale of Clarity spell recharge interval changed from 3 seconds to 2 seconds, and amount changed from 8 to 17. So this means, yeah, you have to sit down to do it, but it also doubles the already doubled rate. So you're getting an additional 17 on top. You're getting 34 spell recharge points instead of just 17 from the basic sit down. The luck value given by Bard's Wanderer Luck has been halved to 50 instead of having 100. The cost of all spells used by the Warlock has been reduced. So this is another massive W for Warlocks. Spells that the Warlock has been using being reduced in HP cost is ridiculous. It helps them significantly on the need for having plus healing gear. But they also say that Torture Mastery now doubles the cost of the spell. So Torture Mastery replenishing health is a huge thing. It's like a staple perk that you have to run. It's the first perk that you get when you're a Warlock. Now that they're making it so that the cost of the spells is significantly reduced, but also saying that Torture Mastery doubles the cost of those spells, I'm going to guess that the reduction means that the spells have been halved, give or take, in cost, and then Torture Mastery brings them up to the values that we're used to seeing playing a Warlock typically. I think that we're still going to see the vast majority of Warlocks bringing Torture Mastery because plus healing is such a relied upon ability. But the part here where you'd be able to possibly mix up your build a little bit more and not need Torture Mastery necessarily as much is worth, I guess, looking into a little bit. Okay, I'm going to move my portrait up toward the top so that we have a better vision of the remaining notes. Okay, and then on to the final bullet points. Updated the amount of players and portals for each locale. Goblin Cave set for 7 players and now has 4 portals and 1 fixed escape. So this actually means that people are going to have to fight. So now we have a maximum of 5 escapes for 7 players instead of having 7 escapes for 7 players. Ruins is set for 16 players and now has a 12 escape portals, which again means that people are going to have to die. Now, I don't think Ruins was necessarily a big problem here for making sure that people died on the map, but having 12 escape portals on 16 should still make for some engaging PvP content. Howling Crypts is set for 18 players and now has 10 escape portals and 3 fixed escapes. It also has 4 down portals and 3 fixed down locations. The fixed down locations can be used by multiple players and do not close. So this is very, very interesting. The fixed down portals were usable like 3 times and then they would close. Now they're going to be usable an infinite number of times. So technically speaking, you could have 18 players if they were able to live. You could have a lobby of 18 people going into hell if they were able to find those fixed escapes. So very, very interesting change. Inferno, set for 15 players and now has 7 escape portals. Very, very interesting because now they have it set for 15 players. So that's an interesting change. I wonder if there's the ability for people to consolidate in there. I don't think so, but maybe they're like ideally aiming for 15. I wonder what happens if they try to cap it off. Like if 15 of the 18 players in Crypts end up in there, does it shut that off? I don't know. Proximity VoIP has been disabled and all player names are hidden during the base camp phase of that game. So, Proximity VoIP being disabled at camp is an interesting piece. I wonder if that means Proximity VoIP has been disabled in-game entirely or if it's just during base camp. Shrine of Protection's physical damage reduction buff reduced from 15% to 5%, and magical damage reduction reduced from 20 to 5. And then Shrine of Power's physical power buff reduced from 30 to 15. So these are massive nerfs to the Shrine's magical damage reduction buff. That is huge. Fountain of Speed's movement speed buff reduced from 50 to 10. So this is a huge shot at buff ball meta. There's no getting around it. The entire aspect of buff ball meta was a combination between damage mitigation, damage output, and movement speed. All three of those things have been significantly nerfed. And then the developer comments, "Hello, adventurers. With Hotfix 18, we're able to establish a good baseline for the balance of the game. We had to strip back some of the diversity of gameplay to get to this point, but this necessary step has helped us gain a better understanding of the complexities of our systems. Using this knowledge, our initial step at rebuilding greater diversity in playstyles, including major updates to the classes and reworks of several perks and skills. This is only the first pass in our goal to add more variety to building your characters, and we will continue to adjust items and add more content each update. Other issues we tried to address in Hotfix 19 are the unsatisfying loot and the buff ball meta. We've now improved the quality and amount of loot in dungeons. Although epic items will still be extremely rare in the normal dungeon, you can expect to see a lot more uncommon and rare items, especially from high-end chests again. We're also not done experimenting and have made some drastic changes, such as the temporary removal of clarity potions as loot drops in our hopes of addressing the buff ball meta. We will continue to monitor this situation and adjust as needed. Establishing this baseline has also enabled us to confidently focus on designing larger content features, which we will start rolling out with EA patch number 2 in a couple weeks. We appreciate your patience in this roller coaster ride, and thank you for your support." Overall, I think these are good changes. People are going to look at maybe the cleric changes or the sitting regeneration of spells as something that doesn't make sense. I think out of all of these things, the thing that doesn't make sense to me the most is the slow change for rangers. That to me doesn't really make much sense. The spell count changes to something like Earthquake also to me doesn't make very much sense, because we don't know whether or not the whole like buff ball thing is going to really be satisfied in this instance. And Earthquake was one of the few counters that actually existed for being rushed down by barbarians and by buff ball clerics and by buff ball fighters. So we'll have to see if this whole thing pans out well enough or not. I think the Warlock changes are really nice, actually, because it doesn't necessarily modify the higher end of Warlock gameplay, but it gives a little bit of love to the lower end of Warlock gameplay, considering how gear dependent they are. Like, yeah, they can scale up really well, but you have to get to that point first. Overall, though, I look at these changes again as something that looks good on paper, but we'll have to get in there and play it and find out. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for all of the love on all of these videos. Once again, if you'd be kind enough to sub the channel here, that would be amazing. I will be live probably for a little while this evening once the patch is live, so come by and hang out in the waiting room if you feel like it. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video, or I'll see you live at twitch.tv/Onepeg in the morning, or on YouTube as we're simulcasting, of course. Thanks so much. See you in the next one. Peace.